back for prices to fall even further. That hurts the whole economy. It's one of the major concerns of the European Central Bank and a big problem in the Eurozone economy.
And is that having an impact on trading on the markets today?
Not so far in what we've seen. In fact, most of the major European markets have opened up in positive territory. The CAC 40 in Paris, as you can see, up 0.6%. The Frankfurt DAX also recovering yesterday after the falls we saw of 1.2% in trading yesterday. Just London's FTSE dipping into the red there a couple of minutes after the open. Over in Asia, a fairly mixed picture across the markets. As you can see, the Nikkei in Tokyo up by 0.3%. But in China, new figures showed industrial production and consumer spending. The rate of growth in those areas actually fell in July. The Shanghai Composite just dipping into the red on those news. That's on top of news that there was a fall in bank lending, which has sent the Chinese markets into the red.
And we will stay in Asia, in fact, for our next story. Some more big economic news out of Japan.
That's right, and the new figures showing that the Japanese economy, the world's third largest, of course, shrank by the biggest percentage since the earthquake and tsunami 3 years ago. Now, that's largely down to a sales tax increase that came into force at the beginning of April. But this sharp fall in growth is going to put more pressure on the economic policies of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, as William Hildebrandt now explains.
The numbers are in and they don't look encouraging. Japan's economy took its biggest hit since 2011, when the country was devastated by an earthquake and tsunami. A steep decline of 1.7% after 2 previous quarters of growth. But the drop was expected. In April, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced a rise in sales tax from 5% to 8%. His effort to curb the world's biggest debt burden led to a shopping frenzy. Since then, consumer spending has fallen 5%, but officials say there's no reason for concern.
I think it's important to look at the economic trend as a whole and not be carried away with the fluctuations of a spike due to last-minute demand and the subsequent reactionary downturn which the increase in sales tax brought about.
The International Monetary Fund has endorsed Abe's economic policy known as Abenomics. It expects Japan will see a recovery in the second half of the year. Business investment was better than expected and exports are forecast to grow. Under Abenomics, Tokyo's Nikkei stock market hit record highs. In 2013, it rose 57%. But the IMF says more must be done in the way of structural reforms, such as loosening the labor market and easing regulation on various sectors. Abe also expects a heavy rebound by the end of the year, and if the Prime Minister gets what he wants, he's expected to raise the sales tax to 10% in 2015.
Let's move on with a look now at some of today's other business news. And the Hong Kong-based airline Cathay Pacific has seen its net profits soar by more than 1,000% to almost $45 million. These figures for the first half of 2014 were driven by strong demand for its long-haul flights. Cathay's warned, though, that it's suffering from increased competition from low-cost carriers in Asia, as well as high fuel prices. Sony says it's sold 10 million PlayStation 4 consoles since its launch last November. That puts it well ahead of its rival, Microsoft's Xbox One, which was released around the same time. In April, Microsoft said it had sold just 5 million units of the Xbox One. And Chinese state media says more than 1,000 companies in the auto industry have been implicated in a government inquiry into anti-competitive practices. It's not clear how many of those firms are foreign-owned, but the authorities have already announced that Audi and Chrysler will face sanctions. General Motors is the latest firm to announce that it's under investigation in China.
Right, finally now, do you like to have a bit of an after-work drink from time to time? For us here on Live from Paris, that usually means a cup of tea rather than anything stronger. But over in South Korea, workers at Samsung are being cracked down on, aren't they, Stephen, for their after-work drinking habits?
Yeah, it's a change in policy to do with sort of what's in our mandatory after-work events or work dinners. They're trying to cut down on binge drinking at these events. Now, an employee speaking to the news agency Reuters said that a rule called 119 has been put in place in Samsung applied to these evening work events. That means that there's just one type of alcohol in one place and only until 9 p.m.
That sounds very sensible, doesn't it? I think that's what your mum would advise.
But apparently, younger staff members at places like Samsung come under a lot of pressure to drink an awful lot at these events, which usually involve going to several different bars and drinking plenty of different alcohol. Now, there has been efforts already made at Samsung. They began 2 years ago to try to cut down on this culture of after-work drinking. The scene, of course, is important if you want to get ahead in these companies. But but the policy is part of course, of lots of bigger changes at Samsung as well. This after they saw their earnings drop sharply in the second quarter of this year.
Right, well, let's see if they jump back up again after these new policies come in. Thanks very much, Stephen Carroll there, with a look through the business news. We're going to take a thumb through the international newspapers now with Florence Villeneuve.